without further ado, I'd like to welcome to the stage our social impact track keynote speaker that knows a little bit about this space and the work she does. Rebecca Bastian is Vice President of Product at Zillow, driving the strategy and execution of product teams focusing on advertising, financial systems, connecting real estate buyers with agents. Rebecca was one of Zillow's very first employees coming over from Microsoft in 2005 and has led the development of several areas of the site since its launch. She spearheaded the initial Zillow listings feed program, the introduction of the Zillow mobile apps, and the advertising products of the Premier Agent program. Always searching for ways to connect her personal values to her technology career, Rebecca launched the Community Pillar program to help connect low-income renters with affordable housing and serves on several local boards relating to rising housing costs and homelessness. Rebecca earned her Master's of Mechanical Engineering at UC Berkeley. She's the mother of 2 boys, and the one I find really interesting, she's an aerial acrobat. So everyone, please welcome to the stage Rebecca.
Thank you. Oh. Hi. Thank you so much for having me here today. This is really cool. I have to admit, I'm super humbled to be up here as the keynote after watching the entrepreneurs that have just been up here. Just really amazing initiatives they're doing. So that's been fun to watch. So I was going to tell you a little bit about myself, but Gator actually just took some of that. I'll reiterate. So as you mentioned, I did my undergraduate degree at University of Washington. I got my master's at UC Berkeley. Spent a couple years at Microsoft, and then about 11 years ago, I moved over to Zillow, and that was in the very beginning when Zillow was still in a very kind of stealth startup mode, and it was exciting. I've spent the past 11 years growing it and working on various different aspects of the company, and that's been really fun. 2 little boys who are always completely angelic like this. And I am really involved in trying to think through homelessness solutions in my community and nationally, which I'll talk more about here. And as you mentioned, aerial acrobatics is my kind of passion hobby. So these have all been, I've had a really good experience here in the Pacific Northwest, learning, growing in my career, building my community, living in Seattle, which is a great city, and it's been really fun and enriching. And then in contrast to that, I look around and I see so many people struggling with housing affordability issues. So both in the Pacific Northwest and in Seattle, but nationally, housing affordability is a really big issue right now. We know that vacancy rates are at an all-time low, housing costs keep rising, and about 1/3 of the rental households in this country are living below the federal poverty level. So it's something that I look around and is just so pervasive. And one kind of artifact of that or symptom of that I see a lot at home in Seattle is homelessness. I look around and see people living in places that are not meant for human habitation, and that's something that really tugs at my heartstrings, just as like a basic kind of human empathy reaction, but also because I spend my days thinking about the housing space, it really it hits hard for me. And we know that homelessness is really directly tied to housing affordability. A statistic that always kind of blows my mind is that a study done up in Seattle showed that for every $100 increase in rent, homelessness rates increase by 15%, which is staggering, right? And we do a thing locally that I think a lot of different cities do, which is called the one-night count every January, where we go out and count how many people are living unsheltered. I participated this past January in that. And in King County, where I live, it was about 4,500 people living, this is outside the shelters, but just living outside and in vehicles. And so, you know, I'm there tucking my boys into bed every night, and I think about just trying to imagine what it would be like not to be able to do that. It just really motivates me to try to create some change in that area. So that's really been my motivator. At Zillow, we have a tagline, which is find your way home. And so I kind of, a couple of years ago especially, set my mind to, I want to find a way that I can help everybody find their way home, which is a daunting goal, of course, but you know, when faced with a daunting goal, the best thing to do is to move forward and try something, right? So I started to try to learn more about the space. I've been, somewhat of an expert in the housing space, working for the largest real estate network, but the whole arena around homelessness and housing affordability was something pretty new to me. And so, I will say that oftentimes ignorance can be a really good thing when you're innovating, right? So I wasn't burdened by being jaded by having tried a lot of things before and knowing what hasn't succeeded, and so I was able to think kind of more blue sky. But at the same time, it's really important to know who the players are in a space, what has been tried, what's being worked on. And so I started to just talk to a lot of people and build a lot of connections, both locally in my community and with some national organizations. And through this networking connections, I ended up being invited to join a few local boards, which was really valuable. So I joined the board of All Home, which is our local continuum of care in King County, which kind of decides where funds go towards homelessness programs. I joined the technical advisory committee for the Seattle Housing Levy, which just passed this past summer, which is really important, and also the United Way of King County Homelessness Impact Council. So through these discussions, through these boards, through reading and just learning from everyone I could, I started to narrow down into a space that I thought could really relate to Zillow's business model, which is making connections about everything real estate between consumers and professionals, and that could solve a problem that didn't have any great solutions yet. And that problem is getting the private market housing more available to people that are struggling to find housing. So through that was born the Community Pillar Program that I started about 1.5 years ago at Zillow. So the idea is fairly simple. It's how do we get the landlords and property managers who manage these private market rentals involved in trying to help with some of these housing solutions. So there's affordable housing and income-restricted housing that's often government-sponsored or grants through different nonprofits, and that's wonderful, but it's not enough to keep up with the housing affordability crisis that we're seeing. And so in order to get everybody housed, we needed to be able to get that private market involved. So we do this thing at Zillow 3 times a year called Hack Week, and it's 1 week, every time each week is all the engineers and product people in the company can work on anything they want for that week. And so oftentimes it's internal tools or features that they've dreamed up. But I pitched this idea and I said, who here wants to see if we can figure out a way to get more people housed that are struggling with housing? And so many people raise their hands because we have this company of people that really care about a lot of these social problems, and we're excited to try something. So this is my first Hack Week team that I formed to work on this. And what we built initially was just focusing on the supply side. So I got this advice from a lot of the different government and nonprofit partners that I spoke with, was first we had to have that supply before we could string along the demand side. So what we built first was just simply the ability for landlords and property managers to self-identify as being a community pillar. And what that means is that they're open to modifying their standard tenant screening criteria to help people obtain housing. So it's a very kind of broad definition, and we kept it broad for 2 reasons. One is that Zillow's a national company, and so each state has different housing laws, and we didn't want to make it too narrowly defined that we could step on any of those. But almost more importantly was that every landlord and property manager is going to have different criteria that they feel comfortable modifying and under different circumstances. So one person might be okay with a less than ideal credit score. Another person might be okay looking at somebody with a spotty employment or housing history or with a criminal background. And so saying, I just want to help in whatever way I can and feel comfortable with is that starting point to find the people that are wanting to help their communities, and then they can kind of take it from there to find what exceptions they're able to make and how they can get creative with helping people get into housing. So with this first version, it was a checkbox when they're creating or editing their profile, and it shows a badge on their Zillow profile. and it lets people search for them in the Zillow professional directory. And we just started with that. We spread the word through some PR, a lot of partnership with these organizations we've been talking to, help spread the word, some different rental associations, put the word out there. And it was just trying to reach those landlords and property managers that wanted to do something good in their community. And when we got to about 5,000 landlords and property managers signed up, and honestly, we didn't really know what to expect in terms of numbers, but that seemed like a pretty good number to keep going. So that's when we started to focus on the demand side, so helping the renters find those rental properties more easily. So the next version that we built, also through Hack Week, was the ability for a renter on Zillow to search for their rental criteria, so filter down by location or size or price of the rental they're looking for, and then say, only show me the rentals that belong to a community pillar, landlord, or property manager. And also in that bucket, we included income-restricted rentals. And so that's something that we'd also recently gotten on Zillow, and those are the kind of larger complexes, government-sponsored, affordable housing, and it's a totally different supply side. But for the renter who's struggling to find housing that really needs to get creative and find somewhere to live, they want to see both of those different supply sides, both the private market and the public market. So we combine those into a filter, and we let renters set up safe searches so they can be notified as soon as one of those properties comes on the market so that they can jump on it right away. And I mean, that went pretty well. You know, we can see numbers around usage and people are using it, but so, you know, it's hard to tell exactly with the numbers. Zillow's not part of the transaction. You know, we're all about empowering people with information and then making those connections in the marketplace. And so, you know, you kind of wonder, well, what impact is this making? And about a month after we launched this user search experience, I got a note from somebody that I didn't know very well, but I had met, friend of a friend, and we had become Facebook friends. And he said, you know, I had some health issues a year ago and became homeless, and I've been living in my car. And I saw that you posted about that community pillar program, and I checked it out, and I just thought you should know that after 363 days of living out of my car, I just secured housing. And that's one person, right? But it gives me shivers still thinking about it, because it's like, I have anecdotal stories about this, and there's still such a long ways to go in terms of building awareness and making those connections. But it's not just a product, right? It's people. And each person's story that you're impacting in a positive way, personally, it's enough to keep me going. And so we are still going. We're just getting ready to roll out kind of the V3 of this, which is realizing that there's the supply and the demand side, and that's kind of the traditional marketplace. But when looking at people who are experiencing some pretty significant rental barriers, there's a really important third party involved. And that's the service providers. So that's housing specialists and case managers and such, which are helping people find and get into housing and advocating for them. So we've been doing a lot of research and focus groups around this and have just built a solution that we'll be rolling out soon that basically allows service providers to use Zillow and use Community Pillar as a shared database of landlords that they've had success working with. So each one of the service providers has this right now, and it's basically an Excel spreadsheet or a piece of paper or something that they use and try to cross-reference, and it's a pretty inefficient process. But they're all trying to know, who are the landlords I want to be working with? Can I manage them all in place and then see their rentals? So this lets them share that across agencies and have access to all these rentals and sign up to get emails or text messages as soon as one of them comes on the market. Because in competitive housing markets, such as most of them around here right now, you really have to be on it the second a property comes on the market and be getting in touch with that landlord right away. So this really streamlines that operation more, or at least I'm hoping it will. So we'll see how that goes. But you know, I feel like right now we're over 20,000 community pillars, and we have about 20,000 users a month searching on Zillow for these properties. And I feel like it's just a starting point. I feel from the stories I've heard and the enthusiasm that I've seen from the different partners we've worked with, I feel really inspired to keep going and see what kind of change we really can create with this program. So since I've been doing this, I keep getting on this soapbox all the time about like it's so important for the tech community to be playing a part in trying to solve some of these big issues. And then the logical question I get asked a lot from my friends and colleagues is, well, how can I help? Which is awesome. That's exactly the right question to be asking. And while I wish I could just say, oh, everyone come help me with Community Pillar, that doesn't really scale. But I do see a couple clear areas where people can be helping. The first one is that it doesn't even have to be a separate initiative, right? So in my conversations with the local community, I'm coming to realize that there are tons of really amazing nonprofits who have great missions that are aligned with all of yours. Like every single one of you could find a local nonprofit that has a mission that you feel strongly about that has basically no tech resources, right? They get their funding and it's earmarked for operational things or for programs that are already in play usually, and they can't take big swings and try stuff, and oftentimes can't even maintain their website or their internet or anything. And so then you have all these really passionate business and tech people who want to help. So this occurred to me earlier this year, well, why don't we just try to connect all of them? I think there's a lot of really interesting opportunities there. So I took a stab at that with a tech volunteer fair that I organized this past spring at Zillow called See Tech for Change. This is the first hashtag I've ever created, but I wanted to make sure that it kind of propagated and stayed in people's awareness. So this was basically just what I just said. We had about 25 nonprofits across a variety of different verticals and focus areas come into the Zillow offices, and we invited the greater Seattle tech community to come in and got about 150 volunteers who really wanted to use their skills, so designers, developers, marketers, PR, SEO, analytics, all these people that wanted to help in some way, and they came in to try to find one of these nonprofits that they could help with. And the nonprofits had projects already defined. That was kind of one of the words of warning I got about this, is make sure they have well-defined projects. So we did that, and they connected, and it was awesome. It was like really great energy in there, and people are making these connections, and I've actually just recently been doing some follow-up and finding out how the projects are going, and some lessons for next year, but it's definitely something I want to keep going. And I feel like it's something that can be recreated in a lot of different places, too. Or alternately, you could also just find your favorite nonprofit and say, how can I help you? I guarantee any of them would love that, right? Say, I'm a developer, I'm an SEO expert. Do you need some help? Yes, they totally do. So that's one of the answers that's very scalable and fairly easily achievable to how can I help create social change. The other thing is that anyone can create an initiative. Leadership can come from anywhere, and we've seen that today. I mean, with these presentations earlier, these are some amazing ideas across a whole variety of different verticals and really creative solutions, which is great. So I think that this can be broken down to things that happen within established companies, like my story with Community Pillar. There's a lot of opportunities to take an established company and build on top of an existing product, and there's so much leverage that can be done there. But it can also happen as a startup or as a standalone company like we saw here today. And I have several friends and colleagues that have started apps to, a couple apps to help people anonymously safely donate to homeless people. Or friends that started a company to crowdsource funding for houses in torn up villages. And I mean, there's kind of infinite possibilities there of something that you can start. And I think that the common denominator with all these stories is people who have a passion to create change and think through the skills and resources that they have access to in order to follow through on that. So when I think about, okay, so you want to do something to create change, to create social impact, where do you start? I think that it really comes down to 3 questions that you can ask yourself. The first one is, what are you passionate about? So, as I told you my story, I feel so passionate about homelessness and housing affordability because I work in this space and because it's all around me. And that's something that I feel strongly enough about that it motivates me to keep going in this area and to keep trying things. I think if you're not doing what you're passionate about, then you could lose steam because, you can hit roadblocks and you really need that motivation of passion. The next question is, what skills do you have? So for me, I'm good at strategic planning, bringing people together, and just executing and getting things done. And that's what keeps me going, and that's the skill that I feel like I can bring to the table. But there's so many different skills, right? Can you write code? Can you analyze data? Can you help communicate messages and tell stories? There's so many different things that can help drive change depending on what angle you take. And then the last question is, what resources can you leverage? So I realize it's a little serendipitous to have the country's leading rental network to build on top of when I'm trying to solve housing issues, but there's a lot of different resources that we can be creative with, right? So do you have people that you can rally around you? Do you have data that you have access to? Do you have code that you can be writing on top of? Physical space even. For a lot of the investors here today, funding, right? That's a huge resource. So thinking through your passion, your skills, and your resources, and then the next thing is just to try something, right? So not everything's gonna work right away, but nothing's gonna happen without trying and without just throwing something out there and learning from it and then trying some more. And I think we have such a unique opportunity in the business and tech communities to use our passion and our skills and our resources, which are abundant in these communities, to really create meaningful change. So I invite all of you here today to join me in just trying to take action and create change. Thank you.
So now we're going to do about 10 minutes of audience Q&A. So if you have a question, raise your hand. Hopefully we have some questions out here.
I see one back there.
In the middle.
So first of all, kudos to trying and doing something. But I'm curious, how many of the homeless have access to the mobile apps or smartphones and things where people typically access a resource like Zillow?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's actually, interestingly enough, because I get asked that a lot, the truth is that usually the smartphone's the last thing to go. So people can lose their housing and a lot of their comforts and their resources, but the smartphone's that lifeline. So a surprisingly high number of people experiencing homelessness do still have a smartphone. But that's also the reason that we're working on this service provider solution, because there are a lot of people who either don't have the technology or don't know what to be doing with it in order to find housing. So I think that building out the solution for service providers is a crucial piece of that equation to make sure that the people that are relying on somebody else to help them with housing has those right tools.
Right here in the middle of the lady.
Sorry, I'm going to try and read and talk at the same time. At the beginning, you said that every $100 is an increase in rent by 15%. So what I don't understand about that is if you multiplied that by 4, if it went up by $400, are you then saying that it's going to go up by 60%? So that's what I was really confused by that quote. So if you can expand on that, it'd be great.
Yeah, I think if you keep doing 15% over the current value, it doesn't add up to 60%.
Right.
But I think that's not the math. Right, it's 15%. It's basically each year multiplied by 1.15. But it's a study from late 2014, and so there's a good chance that hasn't always been the rate, and if we did that study again now, it might be changed also, but at the time of that study, that was the case. And it does show, when you look at, the number of unsheltered people from January 2015 to 2016 did go up by 20%, so in King County. So that data seems to still be accurate, but there has to be some point where the entire population is not homeless, so.
Right here.
So with the opportunities that people have You have folks that are getting in as a community pillar. Is that the 20,000 that you have, is that just in the Pacific Northwest and Seattle? Is that nationwide? And how do the community organizations kind of get in behind that to help other rental agencies join that opportunity?
So I wish that was a localized number. No, that's spread out across the country. So that's why I say there's still a lot of room to grow here. I feel like there's two challenges. One is awareness, and that's where a lot of local organizations can come in and help spread awareness about the program. The second one is incentive, and that's a little trickier, right? Because the people that the landlords and property managers that we've been reaching so far, and I think still have a lot of upside to keep reaching, are people who want to help their communities. So, we reached out and did a survey to people who had signed up, and one of them wrote back and said, when I read about this, I said, this is exactly what I want my brand to represent. So, there's those people that want their brand and their business to represent helping their community, and that's a great incentive. But at a certain point, we're going to run out of those people, and then it's a trickier problem to solve in terms of how do we incent people to help without making it something that they'd want to game. Which kind of strayed from your question a little bit, but in terms of organizations helping spread the word, I think that local nonprofits and government organizations can keep helping us spread awareness up until the point of reaching everyone that really wants to help.
I think you had your hand up a little while earlier.
I laud you for working on getting part of the existing supply, but what's Zillow doing to help increase supply of rental units?
To increase supply of rentals?
Rentals, et cetera, not necessarily HUD level, but to keep people in a home or a rental unit. It sounds like this is a short-term solution as supply keeps getting tighter and tighter.
Yeah, it's the question of how do we get more inventory is a great question. I think that unfortunately, it's not really something that Zillow has the capacity to solve because we don't own any properties and we're not part of any transactions. So our fundamentals are empower people with data, make connections between people around housing transactions. And we also have a really strong economic research team that does provide a lot of data and reports that is used by housing developers and government organizations and all sorts of people to understand housing markets and trends and opportunities. So we do provide that, but we're not the ones creating the housing, unfortunately, so we're kind of more tangential to that.
Right here.
So that we don't all have to recreate every time on something, I always ask, what kind of a toolbox or what do you have to offer others that are interested nationally to help with this? Like someplace to go on your website or something that people can reach out for.
Yes, so are you asking about landlords that want to get involved nationally, or, I'm sorry, sorry, do you mind? Okay, right, okay. So for landlords, for everybody, there's zillow.com/community-pillar. So I'm sorry, I should put that on a slide, but that might be what you're asking for. You can also just Google for Zillow Community Pillar. And so that's a starting point for landlords and property managers who want to sign up for the program, and it will kick off to the search page for renters who want to look for rentals and for service providers who want to nominate landlords. Yeah.
Over here. He's coming to you from the side there.
So oftentimes when I'm browsing Zillow for properties, I see properties that aren't listed on other real estate websites. And so I'm wondering, where does Zillow source its information for properties that are for sale or for rent?
Yeah, we have a lot of different sources for data. In terms of homes for sale and for rent, they usually come to us through feeds of listings. For sale homes, they come from feeds from brokerages and MLSs. And for rentals, there are some different aggregators that send us feeds, and then also landlords and property managers will enter their listings directly there. So we do try to have the most comprehensive set of inventory.
Oh, okay, I guess we got to do the throw all the way up there. This will be interesting again. All right.
All right. So your story about your Facebook friend who found housing was awesome, and it really kind of touched me a little bit. But my question to you is how and what are the difficulties of marketing to kind of that homeless population? I know in your network you said you had partnered with a couple of nonprofits in your area, but nationally, how do you market to the homeless population?
Marketing to the homeless population, yeah, it's a good question, and we definitely have so far had more success with marketing to organizations that speak to homeless populations. So nationally, we did a big partnership with an organization called Community Solutions that operates nationally and is really focused on ending homelessness. And they put out information. We've worked with different national government offices, and then we've reached out to different housing associations in different metros, not just in the Northwest. I think there's more to do there. You know, in Seattle, I actually have a friend who runs an organization called Facing Homelessness, which all those beautiful black and white pictures you saw were from them. But he just really interacts and reaches out to a lot of people experiencing homelessness locally, and I've had him kind of helping spread the word as well. But there's still a lot of opportunity there to figure out the right marketing channels.
I think we have time for one more last awesome question. Upstairs, downstairs. Anybody have, oh, in the very back. Perfect.
Have you been able to track what the community pillars do, their kind of top incentives that they've offered, so that then you are identifying what the biggest obstacles are?
So I think you're asking what criteria gets relaxed the most in.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. No, I haven't. It's a great question. I would like to know that more. You know, we've kind of anecdotally got some stories, and having talked to a few landlords. I don't get consistent answers, so I don't totally know. So just to add why I don't know that, we've talked about adding that as a question when you say, do you want to be a community pillar? And if so, which screening criteria are you most comfortable modifying, right? Is it credit score? Is it employment history? Is it housing history? Is it criminal background? And the reason we haven't done that yet, a few reasons actually. One, like I mentioned, because we're national and there's different housing laws in different states, we want to be really careful not to step on anything that could breach housing laws. The second one is that I have a strong hunch that if you ask a landlord right now, tell me what criteria you're willing to modify, they're going to err on the side of less criteria because, well, I don't want to say I'll just accept criminal background and then just be open to any criminal that knocks on my door. But if you leave it open and then they meet someone and they have an interesting story and they connect, then they'll probably be more open to modifying that criteria. And so I don't want to push people into a corner of having to commit to something right off the bat. I'd rather just have people raising their hand and say, I'm open to helping. What does that mean, right? And so that's why we haven't gotten that exact data yet.
Okay, well, thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you.
A big round of applause.